The first thing that woman ever said to me was, "Sir, you are trespassing on private community property." And she said it while standing on land my grandfather bled for back in 1951. I just gotten home from overseas maybe 3 hours earlier, still smelled like jet fuel and dust, duffel bag in the back of my truck. And there she was, blonde hair perfect, pink blazer, white luxury SUV parked sideways across my ranch gate like she was starring in some kind of reality show about rich people ruining small towns. Then she smiled at me and raised her phone. Police are already on the way. That smile right there. I swear to God, that smile changed the next year of my life. Now before I tell you how a suburban HOA president accidentally destroyed her own neighborhood, trying to push me off my family ranch, I gotta back up a little. My name's Luke Mercer, and my family owns Black Hollow Ranch outside a little town in central Texas called Dry Creek. My granddad bought that land after the Korean War with money he earned welding pipelines and repairing army trucks. 212 acres, creeks, pasture, mesquite trees, limestone ridges. The kind of place where your boots stay dusty and your neighbors wave at you with 2 fingers off the steering wheel. I grew up there learning how to repair fences before I learned algebra. My dad taught me cattle. My mom taught me patience. The Army taught me paperwork. And that ended up maturing more than anybody expected. See, while I was deployed overseas working engineering support for the military, a development company started building this luxury subdivision right next to our ranch. They called it Silver Ridge Estates, which already sounded like a place where people complain about birds making too much noise. Big modern houses, decorative stone walls. HOA rules thicker than a Bible. Folks from Dallas moved in wanting country living without wanting actual country people around them. And sitting right in the middle of all, that was Vanessa Holloway. Vanessa was the HOA president before the neighborhood was even finished. Early 40s, always dressed like she was heading into a board meeting nobody asked for, drove this white Range Rover that somehow always looked freshly waxed. She had that voice too. You know the kind, calm enough to sound polite, but sharp enough to cut skin. At first it was little things. She'd stop along our fence line taking photos. Then came complaints to the county about livestock smell, complaints about tractor noise, complaints about my welding shop. One time she filed a report because my cattle trailer was visually aggressive. I'm not even kidding. Old man Harvey Mitchell from the feed store laughed so hard when he heard that he nearly spit tobacco on the floor. But things changed after I got home from deployment. I walked into my kitchen that first night and found 6 violation notices stacked on the table. According to the HOA, my cattle operation violated community aesthetic standards. They fined me $500 a day on property they didn't own, 4 cows that had been standing there since before Vanessa Holloway ever learned how to parallel park. Then Miss Elena Rodriguez came by the next morning carrying coffee and peach cobbler because apparently every major life crisis in Texas comes with baked goods. She sat at my kitchen table and lowered her voice. "Honey, that woman's been snooping around your creek, asking about water rights. Surveyors too. That got my attention, because normal HOA people complain about weeds. They don't ask about water law." That same afternoon, I found fresh scrape marks on the old cedar gate post my grandfather carved back in 1951. Black Hollow Ranch. The letters were worn smooth from weather and time, and somebody had tried prying the plaque loose. That honestly hit me harder than the fines did. See, when you grow up on land like that, it stops feeling like property. It becomes memory. My father's fingerprints are still inside that barn workshop. My mother planted those oak trees along the creek herself. Every fence line has a story attached to it. And standing there looking at those fresh scratches in the wood, I realized Vanessa wasn't trying to enforce HOA rules. She was trying to erase us. 2 days later, she arrived with a lawyer in a silver Mercedes and a surveyor carrying a tripod. They walked onto my property like they already owned it. Vanessa adjusted her sunglasses and said, "Mr. Mercer, this area has transitioned into residential zoning. Your livestock operation is no longer compatible with surrounding property values." I remember looking past her shoulder at my cattle grazing under the sunset, and then at her spotless high heels sinking into Texas mud. And I said, "Ma'am, these cows have more legal rights on this land than your entire subdivision." Her smile disappeared instantly. That's when I knew this thing wasn't going to end quietly. Vanessa Holloway didn't calm down after that little showdown at my gate. She escalated. Fussed. And the thing about people like her is they mistake confidence for intelligence. They think if they talk loud enough, dress expensive enough, and throw enough paperwork around, eventually normal people will get exhausted and surrender. Problem was, I wasn't normal tired. I'd spent 18 months sleeping beside generators in desert heat while rockets flew overhead. HOA threats printed on cream-colored paper weren't exactly breaking my spirit. 3 days after our argument, county code enforcement rolled onto my ranch in 2 SUVs. Now that alone was strange. Out in Dry Creek, code enforcement usually shows up when somebody's running a meth lab or storing refrigerators full of raccoons in the yard. They don't normally inspect century-old ranches because somebody in yoga pants feels emotionally attacked by cattle. The lead inspector was this skinny guy named Dennis Calloway, wearing polished boots, so clean I'm pretty sure they'd never touched dirt before. He carried a clipboard like it gave him authority from God himself. He walked around my barn measuring beams, photographing tractors, counting fuel cans, asking questions about my welding equipment like he was building a criminal case. Meanwhile, Vanessa stood 30 feet away beside her SUV, sipping iced coffee and watching the whole thing with that smug little smile again. I still remember the smell that morning. Cut hay, diesel fuel, hot cedar wood baking under the Texas sun, and underneath it all, this growing feeling in my chest that none of this was actually about rules. It was about land. Dennis eventually walked over and cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, we've received multiple complaints concerning unsafe agricultural structures operating inside a developing residential corridor." I laughed before I could stop myself. "Buddy," I said, "this barn was standing when your subdivision was still cows." Vanessa cut in immediately. "Well, maybe it shouldn't be." That right there, that sentence, that was the first honest thing she ever said. Because she wasn't trying to regulate my ranch. She wanted it gone. And once I understood that, everything started making sense. That night, I drove into town and started digging through county records. Now, luckily for me, Army engineering work turns you into a paranoid paperwork addict. I know how land surveys work. Easements, water access, utility corridors. You spend enough years around military infrastructure and you learn one important truth. Every disaster starts with somebody ignoring a map. So I sat in that dusty county archive room until nearly midnight, flipping through old plats and zoning records while an ancient ceiling fan squeaked overhead like it was dying slowly. And then I found it. Silver Ridge Estates had been approved under something called transitional overlay zoning. Fancy government language, basically meaning the county allowed suburban development while preserving existing agricultural protections for older properties nearby. In plain English, my ranch was untouchable, legally protected, grandfathered in decades before Vanessa ever moved there. But that wasn't the interesting part. The interesting part came buried inside meeting notes from a planning commission hearing 4 years earlier. I found a transcript where the developer himself, a guy named Richard Holloway, Vanessa's husband, literally described Black Hollow Ranch as a key rustic attraction, increasing neighborhood charm and property appeal. I actually leaned back laughing when I read it. Those people used my ranch to help sell million-dollar homes, then tried forcing me out once the houses were occupied. That's the kind of greed that almost becomes impressive. The next morning I called Wyatt Granger. Now Wyatt was our family attorney and one of those old-school Texas lawyers who still wore cowboy boots with $1,000 suits. He'd been handling land disputes since before I was born, and when I showed him the records, he got real quiet. That's how you know old lawyers are excited. Not yelling. Quiet. He adjusted his glasses, stared at the zoning documents a while longer, then finally muttered, "Luke, these idiots may have just handed us the whole game. Turns out overlay zoning protected not only my cattle operation, but also our original access easements and water rights." And that's where Vanessa made her fatal mistake. She went after the creek. About a week later, I woke up to the sound of excavators. I drove down toward the lower pasture and found contractors digging a drainage trench near the creek bed bordering Silver Ridge. Huge machines tearing through dirt while runoff barriers were stacked nearby. Vanessa stood there in a pale pink blazer, directing workers like she was commanding troops in battle. When she spotted me, she smiled. "Flood prevention improvements," she said sweetly. "Your runoff has become a concern for the community." "Our runoff," I repeated. "Livestock contamination, erosion concerns, mosquito risks. We're protecting homeowners." Now here's the thing Vanessa didn't know. Water law in Texas is serious business. Like generations of feuds serious. And I happen to know a lot about it. See, Black Hollow Creek had flowed through her property since before Texas even became Texas. My grandfather's original deed included protected riparian rights tied directly to the land itself. Nobody could legally redirect that water without consent from every affected landowner. Vanessa's contractors weren't just digging a ditch. They were violating state environmental law. I spent the next 48 hours documenting everything. Drone footage, water samples, GPS maps, soil displacement measurements. Every timestamp recorded down to the minute. By then I wasn't reacting emotionally anymore. I was hunting. That's the difference. Anger burns hot. Strategy burns cold. And Vanessa kept making it easier. Because while she screamed online about dangerous agricultural pollution, I discovered the subdivision itself was dumping fertilizer runoff straight into the watershed through improperly graded storm drains. Silver Ridge was poisoning the creek they blamed on me. I filed reports with the Texas Water Development Board and the Environmental Agency the same morning. Then I waited. 3 days later, state inspectors arrived. You ever watch rich, suburban people panic when government trucks pull into their neighborhood? It's beautiful. Inspectors tested creek water, reviewed drainage permits, surveyed the trench construction, and within hours the entire Silver Ridge project got hit with a cease and desist order. $10,000 a day in fines until the creek restoration was reversed. Vanessa lost her mind. I mean completely. She stormed across the field toward me while contractors shut equipment down behind her. "You did this," she screamed. I remember leaning against my truck watching dragonflies skim across the creek water while she shook with rage in front of me. "No," I said calmly. "You did." And right then, standing there beside that creek with sunset reflecting off the water, I realized something dangerous. Vanessa Holloway had spent her whole life winning arguments by intimidating people. But she'd finally run into somebody who wasn't afraid of her. And people like that, they don't back down gracefully. They self-destruct. After the creek incident, the whole town started looking at Silver Ridge differently. Before that, people mostly rolled their eyes at the HOA nonsense and moved on with their lives. But once state inspectors showed up and news spread that the subdivision itself was contaminating the creek, the mood shifted hard. Folks stopped seeing Vanessa Holloway as strict. Now she looked dangerous. And desperate people do reckless things. About 2 weeks later, she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I came home one evening and found a restraining order taped to my front gate. According to Vanessa, I was threatening community safety, intimidating residents, stalking HOA leadership. She even claimed my welding shop and ranch equipment created militant behavior patterns that frightened neighborhood children. I stood there reading that paperwork while my old cattle dog Boone sat beside me growling low in his throat, like even he knew the whole thing smelled rotten. The crazy part? The temporary order restricted me from approaching the subdivision entrance road, which happened to sit directly beside the lower cattle crossing we'd used for over 60 years. That's when I finally understood her endgame. Vanessa wasn't trying to win legally anymore. She was trying to exhaust me financially and emotionally until I sold the ranch voluntarily. Problem was, she picked the wrong family. Because while she was busy playing neighborhood dictator, Wyatt Granger and I had kept digging through county archives. And what we found made every previous fight look small. See, back in 1986, during an old highway expansion project, the county made a clerical error while redrawing property transfer maps around Black Hollow Creek. 26 acres of Mercer family land were accidentally listed as unassigned transitional property, despite never being legally transferred out of our ownership. You know what sat on those 26 acres now? The Silver Ridge entrance, the clubhouse, the decorative lake, half their jogging trail, all built on land the county technically never owned, meaning the developer never legally bought it, meaning Vanessa's precious HOA had spent nearly $1 million building luxury amenities on Mercer property. I'll never forget the silence in Wyatt's office after we confirmed the survey overlays. Just the sound of ice settling in his whiskey glass while we stared at those maps. Then Wyatt looked at me and said very softly, "Luke, these people declared war on the wrong ranch." The county hearing got scheduled 3 weeks later, and by then the entire town was buzzing about it. Local reporters showed up. Ranchers showed up. HOA residents showed up looking nervous as hell because most of them honestly had no idea Vanessa had been hiding all this from them. And Vanessa? She came dressed like she was heading into a political debate. Cream-colored suit, perfect hair, pearl necklace. Still thought she could talk her way out of reality. The hearing room was packed shoulder to shoulder when Wyatt presented the original deeds, tax records, survey maps, and zoning overlays one piece at a time. You could literally feel the air changing. Every document hit like a hammer. Then came the final survey projection showing Silver Ridge's entrance fountain sitting 17 feet inside Mercer property lines. People started whispering immediately. Vanessa's lawyer looked physically sick, and that's when she snapped. She stood up so fast her chair hit the floor behind her. "This is absurd," she shouted. "We are not letting some backwards cattle ranch destroy an entire residential community." Dead silence. You gotta understand something about Texas. You can insult a man personally and maybe folks let it slide. But insulting ranch families in a rural county courthouse? That's almost religious-level stupidity. Commissioner Hale leaned forward slowly and asked, "Mrs. Holloway, are you suggesting documented property records are fraudulent?" Vanessa pointed directly at me. "I'm suggesting this man manipulated local officials using military connections and intimidation tactics." That woman was unraveling in real time. And honestly, part of me almost pitied her, because deep down I think Vanessa built her whole identity around controlling people, around winning, around believing money and confidence could reshape reality itself. Then one day reality punched back. Hard. Wyatt finally stood and delivered the cleanest line I ever heard in my life. "Commissioners, my client isn't asking for revenge. He's simply requesting that people stop building neighborhoods on land they do not own." Mun. Even the reporters smiled at that one. The ruling took less than an hour. All HOA claims against Black Hollow Ranch were declared invalid immediately. The subdivision's governing structure got suspended pending title correction. The county ordered emergency mediation over land usage agreements and launched an investigation into the original development approvals. Vanessa walked out before the hearing even finished. Didn't say a word. Didn't look at anybody. Just grabbed her purse and left while cameras followed her into the parking lot. And weirdly enough, that wasn't the most satisfying part. The most satisfying part came later that evening. I was standing down by the creek at sunset, watching Roosevelt, my old Red Bull, drink from the water while cicadas buzzed through the trees. The air smelled like cedar and wet earth after a little rainstorm rolled through. Then headlights pulled up behind me. A black SUV. For a second, I honestly thought Vanessa had come back for one last fight. But it wasn't her. It was three Silver Ridge homeowners, a retired teacher, a young couple, and this older widower named Carl Bennett. Carl stepped forward awkwardly and said, "Luke, we didn't know what she was doing. Most of us just wanted a quiet neighborhood." I remember looking back toward those big expensive houses glowing under the evening sky, then back at my grandfather's creek. And right there, all the anger kind of left me. Because the truth was, most people weren't evil. They were just scared, distracted, too busy living their own lives to notice somebody dangerous steering the wheel. 6 months later, Silver Ridge dissolved its original HOA completely. Vanessa and her husband divorced not long after the fraud investigation started. Last rumor I heard, she moved somewhere outside Phoenix trying to start over. Black Hollow Ranch stayed exactly where it always was. Still dusty, still loud, still alive. And every now and then people online ask if I went too hard on her. Honestly, maybe I did. But if somebody tried erasing your family's history with lawsuits, lies, and intimidation, if they treated your home like an inconvenience standing in the way of profit, what would you have done? And that's what I want to know from you guys. Was Vanessa just protecting her neighborhood? Or did she become exactly the kind of bully she claimed to fight against? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I promise this story split my town right down the middle. And if you enjoyed this one, hit subscribe, because next week I'm telling you all about the city inspector who tried shutting down a roadside barbecue stand and accidentally exposed a corruption ring that reached all the way into the mayor's office.